皆様、こんばんは。本日はアメリカ大使館主催の英語教授法オンライン研修にご参加いただきありがとうございます。Good evening, everyone. My name is Grace Choi, and I'm an American diplomat at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, working on education and exchanges. I'd like to welcome you to today's teacher training session with Jenny Selvidge titled, How to Use Presentations to Enhance English Skills. Jenny is joining us today from Kansas City, Missouri in the United States. She is a TESOL expert and served as the State Department and U.S. Embassy Tokyo-sponsored English Language Fellow from July 2019 to March 2020, and was embedded in the Tokyo Metropolitan Board of Education. While here, she provided training to Japanese teachers of English and JET teachers. She's currently teaching ESL classes at Kansas University. Under the circumstances caused by COVID-19, the U.S. Embassy Tokyo has been providing virtual teacher training seminars by covering various TESOL topics. I hope you will find this online teacher training series useful in your teaching and that we will see you again next time. Thank you and enjoy today's session.
Konbanwa. Let me share my screen. It is good to be with you this evening. Here we go. It is very early here in Kansas City, but I know you're at the end of your day. It's good to be with you, and thank you for joining us on a Friday evening after a long week. We really appreciate that you are here, and I hope that something in this presentation will be useful to you in your classrooms. Presentations are something that I have really enjoyed using as an instructor, and they can be very dynamic in your teaching practice. And so I hope that you will find some good ideas in this presentation. So let's see if this is going to work. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about kind of three areas: the benefits of using presentations, some important things to consider when you're doing presentations, and then I'm going to go by each age level, elementary, junior high, and high school, and talk about what our goals might be for that group, and then some ideas and examples for you, including some rubrics. So what are the benefits of presentations? There are so many. So one of them that I think is really important is that it builds confidence. And as we know, many students don't have confidence in speaking English. And so we want to give students many different opportunities to speak in class, small groups, partners, things like that. But presentations should also be in our toolbox for ways to build their confidence in speaking. It also increases fluency. The more you talk, the better you'll be at it, right? And we want students to be fluent. We want them to be able to speak without, stopping all of the time, and to have some continuity to their speaking. And presentations can help do that. They have to practice their presentations quite a bit. And the more they practice, the more fluent they become. So presentations are very useful for this. It enhances overall communicative skills. Presentations are something that many of us do in real life. And so we want them to have these authentic chances to communicate in front of people. And there's also the listening component to presentations. So you're enhancing many skills at once. And it also normalizes the sharing of ideas and opinions. Sometimes it's difficult for our students to share an opinion. It's maybe not natural or normal for them to do that, or to share their own personal ideas. But this is something that we want our students to move toward. And so presentations can help with that. So my hope is that if we start with elementary school and we build with junior high and high school, students by the time they leave high school will feel very comfortable with speaking, especially in presentations. So the goal is in elementary school, we start with small, low stakes presentations. And so that becomes a normal part of their school life. And then you build on that in junior high, you build on that foundation. And then you start to do academic type presentations. And then in senior high school, you're really fine-tuning those academic focused presentations. So this is my vision for how presentations could go starting with elementary school, and then they'll just keep building, hopefully over time. That's my big goal, my dream. One thing I want to note first of all is that perfect pronunciation, can you hear me? Perfect pronunciation should not be part of presentations. So perfection in general is something that I would urge you to step away from. Perfect grammar, perfect speaking, perfect intonation, perfect pronunciation. It's really not helpful for language learning to have this idea of perfection because it increases anxiety and stress in students. And that's not the goal anyway. When I was in Japan and I spoke with students, I was so excited when a student spoke to me. Right? When they engage in a conversation with me, I wasn't too concerned whether they were speaking with perfect grammar or perfect pronunciation. I was thrilled if they spoke to me because that was so rare. And so I think perfection needs to be put aside, and they definitely don't need to be in presentations. And so I want to move the focus away from these types of things that we look at in presentations and move more to content and ideas. So I have some considerations for you to think about when we think about presentations. And these are kind of general for all teachers of all ages. So the focus should be on communicating ideas, right? We want students to communicate in speaking. And so that should be the focus, is on whether they are expressing ideas and opinions clearly and effectively. When possible, combine or tie a presentation topic to what you've done in a lesson. That really provides a lot of good continuity for a lot of reasons, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Give students choice whenever possible. I know it's not always possible, but if it is, it's really great to give students a choice of what they present about. The times that I have given my students the choice of topic, I have seen a drastic difference in their interest, in their engagement, and in the quality of their work. When students have a little bit of choice, they have a little bit more responsibility and onus over what they're doing. And so their interest is higher and they will use more English in the end. So give students choice. So it's not just about speaking. There are many people in the classroom listening, right? When someone's giving a presentation. So don't let that opportunity go by. Address the listening skills and help develop those. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. I'll also talk more about how to balance topics that you give them and thinking about how well they speak. So don't give them a difficult topic if they're not confident in speaking. And then include frequent presentations. Do these more often. Do smaller ones, more casual ones more often. So you don't have one big presentation that they have high stress over. So let's dive in a little bit more to some of these. So the focus of presentations should be on communication. Talking to the student, so these might be some rubric questions to consider. Did you communicate ideas effectively? And of course, you would want to communicate with your students what you mean by that. What is effective communication in a presentation? If you have models that you can show them, that's always really helpful. Of course, you would go through each of these so students know exactly what you mean by this. But the ultimate question I would ask is, did they communicate their ideas? And then pronunciation is certainly a part of it, but I would urge you to consider, is it comprehensible? Is their pronunciation good enough that you understood what they said? Perfect pronunciation, I think, is a waste of time. So if they were comprehensible, I think that is just fine. And, accents are great. Every language, you have your own accent, and that's fine. So really urge you to think about comprehensibility as a goal. Same thing with grammar. Is the grammar comprehensible? Could you understand the ideas? Again, the ideas are the central focus. Students will make errors in articles and plurals and maybe verb form. It's possible. So that's okay. They're speaking in a language that's not their first language, and that's completely normal. What we need to think about, though, is if they have any grammar problems that really, I don't understand your ideas because of these grammar issues, then that is something that you need to address. But overall, comprehensibility is the goal. And also, I would urge you to think about volume and speed. So were they too loud or too soft? Were they too fast or too slow? So again, we're looking for students to become effective and natural communicators over time, right? And so that is part of it, the volume and speed. What's very important is that if it's possible, don't just do a presentation in isolation. If you could tie it to the lesson, that is really effective. So at the end of a unit, maybe you've done a long unit, maybe at the end you have a small presentation at the end, maybe 2-3 minutes. What's important about this is that students have already learned the content. They've already learned the vocabulary. They've already learned the material. So now they can focus on their speaking skills and improving those. Okay? So that's very useful. And we're always looking for ways to assess our students, right? I've talked in a previous webinar about assessment. This could be your assessment. So they can show you if they've learned the material through their presentation. So really seamless connection between the lesson content and the presentation, I think, is really useful. All right, listening skills. So when I look up the learning objectives for a CEFR band, for example, for A1 or A2 or B1, B2, there are listening skills on there for presentations. So we can't ignore those listening skills and we can't miss the opportunity to develop those. So give tasks to the listeners. Listening is not passive. They should be actively listening. And we want to develop those skills. If they take an exam like the entrance exam and there's a listening component, we need to use opportunities in our classes to develop those. And these are just some example questions that you might have. You might just choose one of these. What were the main ideas you heard? Summarize the presentation in one sentence. What was one important idea that the student mentioned? The problem with that last one is they only listen for one thing, write it down, and then don't listen to the rest. We know our students, right? But think about the listener and what you could ask them to do while they listen to a presentation. Okay, this is something that I have found to be very useful for me in my teaching. And when I learned this, it really changed how I taught. So we need to think about how we balance what we're asking students to do. So if students struggle with speaking and are given a difficult topic, it's hard for us as teachers to know where they are struggling and where we can help them. So we really need to think about how we balance the content, what we're asking them to do, with how we balance their speaking tasks, their language tasks. And let me explain this a little bit more. Okay, so I was trying to figure out the best way to show you this. So at the top, we have a hard skill, and at the bottom, we have an easy skill. So for example, if they are not confident speakers and their speaking ability is quite low, we want to give them an easy topic to talk about. We don't want someone who struggles with speaking to also struggle with new ideas, new vocabulary, just content that they don't feel comfortable with. So for example, what would happen is if you give them a hard topic and in their presentation, they may stop a lot with vocabulary words or with ideas. So if it's hard for them, I don't know, are they struggling because they're struggling with speaking, or are they struggling because they don't know the words that they're talking about, the vocabulary? So that's why you need to give them an easy topic. the other way, let's say that you have maybe a group of returnees and they have very confident speaking abilities. Then you can increase the difficulty of their topic. So choose a more difficult topic if the students feel confident in their speaking. So there should always be, they shouldn't both be at the same level. This changed my teaching when I learned this, because I realized I was giving my students hard tasks and hard language tasks at the same time. And so that was too much. And so I needed to give them the chance to be successful. So for example, if you want an easy topic, give them something they know about well in their own life. It doesn't have to be an academic topic because our goal is to have them speak well in a presentation. So the topic can be very easy and very simple. So maybe you talk about their favorite anime character. They know about that. They can talk to you, for a long time about that. So if the topic is accessible to them, then they can focus on their speaking and their presentation skills. If their speaking ability is quite good, you can give them a higher topic like energy efficiency in big cities. So then they can think about, okay, I need to work on, the vocabulary, the ideas. And so you really need to offset the two. I hope that is clear. And we can talk about this in the Q&A if you have more questions. All right, the frequency of presentations. Especially for our Japanese students, we want students to feel at ease. This is something that I think should be a goal, especially, younger or at any age. I don't know where your students have come from. You need to know your students and you need to gauge how comfortable they feel with speaking. If they do not feel comfortable, then really start small and easy in what you ask them to do, and then you can build. So my suggestion is to do smaller presentations more frequently. And I can imagine you say, I don't have time to do a million presentations. And you could think of presentations not as formal times, but it could be a 1-minute presentation at the end of a class. You could do it online so that students can do it and you can grade it after class. So I would just urge you to think about whether you could do this more frequently, because the results are quite important. It reduces anxiety, which is what we want to do, increases comfortability, and it's also easier to grade for us as teachers if the focus is small. So I would urge you to consider this. Okay, let's move to talking about different age groups. So I love this picture here. This is something you might see in a typical school in the United States, where students are constantly and consistently sharing in the class. And so it's not a formal presentation, it's just sharing something and it looks like he's having a good time. So our goal for elementary is for students to become comfortable, right? We want to just ease them into this because I'm sure, as I know from some of the schools that I visited, students maybe don't want to talk in English. So our goal needs to be, how can we create presentation opportunities for them that just help ease them into it? We also want them to start sharing their ideas and opinions in easy ways, right? So what do you think about spaghetti or about hamburgers or, easy things to start sharing their opinions about, because we want them, as they continue in their education, to become confident sharing their opinions more. We also just want them to have fun. And this is an interesting conversation I've had with many teachers in Japan over the months, is this idea of fun. Fun is not the goal. If they enjoy themselves, their learning will increase. So we're not doing fun things just for fun's sake. It really does help with engagement, with learning, with reducing anxiety. And so if they enjoy themselves, then that helps their language learning ultimately. And then our goal for them in presentations is, again, assessment. We want to see that they have learned what we've taught them. And so this is a really good way to do that. So let me give you some ideas here. Show and tell is something that every American student has done in elementary school. I did it, and I'm not a young person anymore. So we've been doing this for a long time. Show and tell, and I'll talk about this a little bit more. They bring something in and they tell the class about it. It's very simple. They could do a skit. They could have group work where they, like if you're doing greetings, they could do a skit about, okay, 3 people when they see each other at the beginning of the school day, just how would that go? Do a little skit. How-to talks. When I was in Japan, I was so amazed in elementary schools because students rode unicycles. I was amazed by that because we definitely don't do that here. And it was so interesting for me. And so maybe you could tell the students, American students don't know how to ride unicycles. Maybe we could do a presentation where we explain to them how to ride a unicycle. And they would probably be excited about that and say, oh yeah, we could tell them how to do that. So how-to talks are great, how to do something. And then again, if you could tie it to the lesson, and I'll give you an example here in a second. And elementary students now more than ever are very adept at technology. And so you could do presentations on Flipgrid. And I've talked about it in previous webinars, but you could do show and tell with just their phone. So they could go around their house and do a quick video showing them something in their house, upload it, and it's done. And then you can watch it, whenever it's convenient for you. So it's a great option for presentations, even for elementary school. So let me go into show and tell a little bit more. It's very simple, but very effective. And it's a good way to just make it an easy presentation. They don't even know they're doing a presentation, really. So students bring something from home, they describe the item, and they tell why it's important to them or why they like it. So again, they're doing a little bit of opinions. This is simple, but very effective. And you could also tie it to the lesson. So I saw one lesson in elementary school in Tokyo, and they were talking about different kinds of food around the world. And they focused on adjectives like yummy, salty, delicious, sweet, things like that. And so you could have a show and tell assignment about that topic. So you could have them bring a picture of their favorite food and then tell us about it using the adjectives that we learned. So this is an authentic task because it's something that they would do in real life. And hopefully it's enjoyable for them because they like food most of the time. And then your rubric would be quite simple. Were you on topic? So if a student brings a picture of their unicycle and tells us about why they like their unicycle, that's not on topic. It's not about food. So were you on topic? Did you describe it using appropriate adjectives? And did you speak loudly enough? So very simple ways to assess these things. Okay, let's move on to junior. Oh, nope, I have a rubric. Sorry. So one thing, and I talked about this in my assessment webinar, your rubric could look like this. You could have smiley faces that show them, if they know what they mean, how they did on those things. And so you could give this back to them and they would know how they need to do better next time. So it could be a very, very simple rubric for elementary. Okay, now we're moving to junior high. Okay, so again, our goal continues to be that students feel comfortable speaking because Japanese students struggle with this. So again, this should be a major goal for us. But in junior high, they can begin to present about academic topics or more higher level topics. Again, you could tie it to their lessons. And you can start requiring some organization to their presentations. So, an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. So you can begin to move them toward what they're going to need to do in high school. And again, this could be an assessment tool for you to show what they have learned. Okay, so some ideas. Tie the presentations to the content of your book. Okay, so whatever you're doing in the book, at the end, do a short presentation. And encourage topics for students to share opinions. Any time that you can add that to your presentation would be a good idea. because it's difficult for students. And so if they have a little bit more consistently, they'll become more comfortable doing that. Group presentations are great. Sometimes I hated them as a student, but they're really useful in reducing anxiety. So it's not just one person giving a presentation, but you do it in a group. And as a teacher, you're beginning to teach how to organize a presentation. So you talk about, how do we start a presentation? We don't just start with our material, we start with some kind of hook and an intro. And then how do we conclude? How do we finish a presentation? How do we ask, for questions at the end? And again, you use some basic rubrics. You don't need complicated rubrics. So one idea would be, I think we're talking a lot about recycling and the SDGs that we talk about a lot in Japan. So if you did a unit on recycling, an assignment could be for a group project to create a TV advertisement for your ward describing new recycling initiatives. So this applies what you've been talking about in class, but it's something very interesting and engaging for them to do. So my rubric questions might be these. Again, were your ideas, let's focus on ideas, were they appropriate and on topic? And were they clearly presented? Was there some good organization? And again, I would probably do volume and speed, and you could do pronunciation, comprehensible there if you wanted. With group projects, you always need to determine whether each group member did their part. And then I would start to talk about time limits. So a rubric might look like this. Rubrics can look like anything. Like I had the smiley faces in the previous one. This is just one idea. So I have my 5 components on the left. And then my 3 categories are room for improvement, good, and excellent. So good is a pretty standard assessment. So ideas are mostly appropriate, on topic, had basic intro, body, and conclusion, may have missed transitions. Mostly good pace, some unequal division, but mostly okay, between 5 to 7 minutes. And then I can move up to excellent and down to room for improvement. And again, I would probably just highlight which one they struggle or which one they got, hand it back, and they're done. Okay, so let's move to senior high school. So here is where you could fine tune their presentation skills and really help them to do more academic topics. So if your students come to you and they have stronger speaking skills, then I would increase the difficulty of the presentation topics. But again, depending on your students, if you have a group of students that really are afraid to open their mouths, then I would still urge you at the beginning of the year to start with easier topics and move toward harder topics at the end. So academic topics, I think there's a lot of possibilities for you. So that should be poster sessions would be a great thing to do. And I'll show you one from my students. And then again, presentations in high school, still like every other age, can be an assessment tool. So you can assess that they have learned what you have hoped that they would learn. So again, you could tie the content to the book. That's always a good idea. You could still do group presentations. You see in this picture here, a group presentation. You can't see it, but they're doing it on DNA, and they have a prop, and so they're all in front of the class. Poster presentation, I'll show you in a second. One really nice thing to do is to complement a writing assignment. So if they have written a paper, then you could take that paper and say, okay, now I want you to create a presentation based on the information you wrote about in your paper. So that would hit all of the skills. So you have the writing, and assuming they did some reading for that. And then you would have the speaking component as well. So it's really nice to combine assignments with writing and speaking assignments with those productive skills. Okay, so let me show you one that I do with my students currently. So I teach a class that's all online. So this is going to be a virtual poster presentation. So the class is about race, class, and gender. So it's a pretty in-depth class in terms of what we talk about. And so their task, their assignment was to watch a movie that has issues of race, class, and gender. And then they need to present about that. So first they created a poster in PowerPoint. And what I love is that it looks like it's fun and just a fun assignment to do a poster. It's really pretty and it's got great pictures, but there's a lot to this. So if you notice the headings, they all have bullet points, and there is some grammar to bullet points. They need to be parallel. So nouns with nouns, adjectives with adjectives, verbs with verbs. And so there's some really good and important language skills, and they need to do it without writing full sentences. Some do better than others with that. They need to cite their sources for their images. So you'll note that each image has the URL source where they got the image. That's a research skill. And then they have their work cited in the middle. So they need to use, we use MLA citation. They need to use research citation skills to cite the movie. So just the poster itself has some skills in it. And then in non-COVID life, we would have all of the students in a room with their poster, and then we would invite other teachers to come, students to come, and they would go around and they would give a little explanation of their poster and then take questions. So not in real life, in COVID life, I do it on VoiceThread. So you'll see I blacked out his face, but he then presented about this, and it was 5 minutes long. And so he took the content that's on his poster and he elaborated and expanded and explained the issues of race, class, and gender in Mulan. I really enjoy this presentation topic because they get to watch a movie, but it also has some deeper components to it. And so these are my rubrics. I have 2 separate rubrics. I have a rubric for the poster itself and a rubric for their presentation. And so I'm not going to go through all of it, but there are some things that I want to highlight to show you where I would put my focus. So for the poster, content is important. So do you have appropriate details for your themes of race, class, and gender? The language, this is the one with the most points. So it's in your own words, so they can't plagiarize. It's clear and concise, which is not easy to do. They use those short phrases and bullet points with parallel structure, and then their spelling and grammar is accurate. For the presentation side, what is worth the most points is their content. So it's not grammar, it's not pronunciation, it's their ideas. So you gave a short summary, you gave a setting, the information you presented clearly demonstrates the themes. But we do have grammar on the rubric, and I want to show you how we view grammar here where I teach, and in the United States and a lot of places, this is more of our focus. So a perfect score would be nearly error-free. So they could get a perfect score and still make mistakes. 4 out of 5, they have some errors, but the errors don't impede comprehension. So the comprehension is still clear. Down to a 3, there's more errors, but the presentation is generally comprehensible. So again, it's comprehensible, that's our focus. They get a 2 if there are many errors, and there might be a couple parts where we don't understand, but we get the idea of the overall presentation, it's clear. And then a 0 if they have quite a few comprehension areas. And then we do have pronunciation and fluency. We don't ignore it, but it's only 5 points. So pronunciation does not detract from the presentation. So they could struggle with pronunciation, but it doesn't detract. And their presentation is fluent. This one is very important because it has to be well practiced. If they haven't practiced it, it's not going to be fluent. And more practice means more speaking practice, which is great. And then volume and speed are appropriate. So that is my rubric. This is for first semester college. So it might be a little too much for high school. I don't know, it depends on your students. And as I said before, rubrics, you can make it whatever you want. And if you Google rubrics, you will see there are a million different kinds of rubrics you can use. If you Google speaking rubrics, presentation rubrics, you will find a wealth of information that can help you figure out what is best for you and your students. Okay, let's wrap up. So I want you to think about these things. So the goal of our presentations is to increase speaking ability, their comfortability in doing it, and overall their communication skills. Those are our goals, our focuses. And I would urge you to use authentic tasks and topics, things that are tied to what's in their book or things that are tied to what they might do in real life. So what opinions would they have in real life, and how would they share them? So if you could make them authentic as possible, that always helps. Use the lesson content. So if you have a unit in your book, there's reading, there's chance for writing. Maybe there's a video where they listen, and then you'd give them the chance to speak. So if you tie presentations to the lesson, you really do have the chance to build all 4 skills. Give students the chance to form opinions. I kind of already talked about that before. This is a great way to do that. Don't forget the listening skills. Think about what the students who listen need to do to develop their skills. So one thing would be listening for transition words. First, next, therefore, in conclusion. So you want to train them to hear those things because they'll probably need that for their entrance exam, I would imagine. And what's always true is start where your students are in their ability level, and then slowly give them new challenges. You don't want to overwhelm them with too much too soon, because again, our goal is to encourage them to speak and to be successful, and then move them up in their challenge. Okay, so I'm going to take questions, and then after that, there will be an announcement from the embassy. One thing I do want to note is that I have given 6 webinars before this one. And so you'll see the topics here. So I've talked about communicative grammar, teaching writing from sentence to paragraph level. And I have done one about speaking, general speaking, team teaching, and critical thinking and assessment. And so these URLs are here for you, and I'm going to put this in the chat box so that you have the URLs there for you. So I just pasted these into the chat box for you. Oh, I don't think you saw it. Let me try that one more time. I'm going to do that again. Okay, hopefully you can see it, but this will be uploaded and you can see this in the future. So please do, if you're interested in the previous topics, please do look at those, and I hope that they'll be helpful for you. Okay, so we are going to do Q&A now. Please put your questions in English because my Japanese is bad, and please put them in the Q&A box, not the chat box. So please use the Q&A box for any questions that you have. Okay, I already have a few questions, which is great. So the first question, in elementary schools, I usually give students templates or patterns of their presentations. Is it right or not? I think it depends on what you mean by templates or patterns. I think it's always good to give students a model, like show them, this is what I'm looking for. I think at the elementary level, I would probably shy away from giving them too rigid of expectations. So that's why in the presentation I mentioned a very simple rubric, because you don't want to bind them into restrictions. You want them to feel free to just share and have fun, but still express their ideas. So it depends, I guess. I would have to see what you mean by the template or the pattern. Yes, so the PowerPoint, the presentation will be on the website that I put in the chat box, and you can see my presentation there. For group work, how do you evaluate each student? If one of the students might be a really strong student and offer a lot of ideas, we may not be able to evaluate the content. Yeah, so that is definitely true. And that's where you tell them that ahead of time and say, you know, you're in a group. And so I'm assessing you individually within your group. And so if you don't share a lot of ideas, you won't get a good grade. That's why teaching the rubric ahead of time and making the rubric very, very clear is important, so that they know if I don't speak, if I don't share in my equal part of time, I won't get a good grade. Should they read from a script? You can read from a script, but that's not communicative. That would be that would be a reading skill. So that wouldn't be a communicative skill, but if they're really practicing how to say words out loud at the beginning, I think that that's fine. I think there's a place for that. So again, if you see where your students are in their ability and meet them there. So if they need a script to practice speaking out loud, great, do that. But I wouldn't consider that a presentation. And that's not speaking for communication. So there's a place for that, but it's more just a reading practice. Some Japanese students tend to just read the script when they make a presentation. Oh, I think maybe that's what the person before meant. Do you have any tips or activities that help students to make a presentation? Yeah, I would put that in the rubric. So I would give them a grade for that. So I always tell my students that you need to practice enough time so that you're not reading. I let my students use a note card, and they can definitely look down. And we also talk about the skill of creating note cards, because sometimes students just write every word on a note card, and that they can't read that, or they will read it, I guess, is the problem. So having kind of an outline or bullet points on a note card will show them, if they get lost and they forget where they are, then the note card will help them. But this is definitely something that I would address. And if it is a problem, then put that in their grade. That's what I would do. How can I copy the chat box that you have just put the site? Does it not work to copy and paste? If it doesn't work to copy and paste, I can show the screen again in just a minute, and you can take a screen. You can take a picture of it, and you'd have to enter the URL in individually. But I will go back to that screen, or you can take a picture of the chat box. I'm sorry if that's the best way to do that. How can I decide the level of topic when I have 20% of students very fluent and other 20% very beginner? I would give them choices. Everyone doesn't have to do the same topic. So I know it doesn't seem fair, but it doesn't help high-level students to get them an easy topic. So you could use the same theme, like, for example, recycling, if that's your topic. And I would give people either a choice, and hopefully they choose what's appropriate for them, or I would, tell them, you're going to do this topic, and try not to make it obvious that these are easier or harder. But I'm going to give everyone a different topic, and so you'll do this one. And so an easier topic might be explain ways that Japan recycles. That could be an easy topic. And then a harder topic could be what are the SDG standards for recycling, and how can other countries improve their recycling practices? Something like that. So differentiation is so difficult, but this is one way to do that. And that's why it's great to not have the practice of giving everyone the same topic. Make it normal that everyone has a different topic. And if it's normal, then they might not realize that you are giving them different level of difficulty. Or maybe they will, but that's okay. What practice should teachers suggest to improve presentations? For example, record one's voice. Yeah, so I would have them record it on their phone or have someone record them doing it. And again, that's definitely important, and it depends on what age. I say that's really important towards the end of high school. But again, it's important to note, but I wouldn't put too much emphasis on this early on. They're going to have bad presentation skills at the beginning, and that's to be expected. I would, again, focus on content. But yeah, I always tell them to practice in a mirror, record it in a video. I mean, they have phones, so they can do that. Do you make use of peer feedback in your classes? If you do students use the same rubric with the one the teacher uses? I do sometimes, and that's a way to keep them engaged and a way to get them listening. I would create a separate sheet for students to fill out because you're looking for things that are different than students would be looking for. Yeah, a peer feedback sheet is very useful. When students make a presentation, they're afraid of making mistakes. They want teachers to, I'm guessing it cut off there, but I'm guessing they want teachers to correct their mistakes. That is something that I think in general, teachers need to train their students not to do. And you could have times where you say, okay, in this grammar activity, I will answer your grammar questions and I will correct your grammar in this assignment. But in presentations, I will not correct your grammar unless it was like a problem for me understanding you. So I would have clear times in your class when you say, okay, now I will do this, but I won't now. And I know it's difficult because in Japan, students and teachers and everyone is so concerned about perfect grammar, but that really hinders speaking. And so I would keep that away from speaking tasks. And so you could do that in a grammar lesson, in a writing lesson if you wanted. But again, I would do that. I wouldn't do that a lot because you want to get away from perfect grammar. Have a time and place for it. I wouldn't do it in presentations. My students are high school students. At presentation, I let them make PowerPoint slides. Some students often make use of Google Translation and copy and paste. Should we allow them to use it? Or how can we drive them in an educational way? Google Translate often isn't even accurate. And so one thing that I would urge you to do is use it as a lesson. So for example, if you have like a workshop time in your class and you say, okay, today we're going to work on, you're going to write your bullet points or you're going to write your slides out on a piece of paper. And so they can't have access to a computer. And so you'll see what they are doing there in class and you make that a lesson. How do we paraphrase? How do we do parallel structure and bullets? And you make that a class activity and then later they can put it in their slides. So I would make it a lesson and do it in class. And then you could collect those papers and then you can compare it with their slides. And if their slides are totally different, you say, you use Google Translate, you can knock them down in points for that. Oh, good. You copied it. Great. Great. Good. Could you tell me some tips for teaching how to make a presentation? I often prepare a model presentation, but most of them just copy them. I would like them to be more creative. One thing I would do is do it on a completely different topic so they can't copy what you're doing. And I always show my students a model, but I never give them access to the model like they can't keep looking at it because they will copy it. And so I show them once in class and then that's it. And we talk about what I expect, but then I tell them yours has to be different than mine. And so I do a presentation on a completely different topic, but it has the same components. I'm looking for your ideas and for this and that. How do you organize a short presentation each class, or how much time do you have for short presentation? So, this is a challenge in Japan because of your large class sizes. So that's why I would utilize Flipgrid for this. But in class, you could do it in, if you have an ALT, you could divide the class into two. And a short presentation could be 90 seconds. Could be very quick. So still 90 seconds for 40 students is a lot. You might spread it out over 2 days. But then again, this is when I would utilize online tools because this would fix that problem. When students make a presentation, they're afraid of making mistakes. They want teachers, yeah. Like, I think this is maybe I can't remember the person, but I wouldn't do it in presentations. Do it at a separate time in a grammar activity or a writing activity, but not for presentations. What kind of activities do you recommend to increase the understanding when the vocabulary levels or proficiencies are so different? That's why I talked about changing the level of difficulty. So your activities, if you are assessing a language skill, they need to be using vocabulary that is known. So something easy that they are confident in. And then you're going to build vocabulary over time, and then you can build what you expect them to present upon over time. So in their reading, in their units, in their lessons, you're building vocabulary. But in presentations, make sure the presentation topic is easier so that they're not struggling with vocabulary. Okay, I've let my students give presentations in my classes, though it may require many hours to get ready for having presentations, such as making PowerPoints. Do you think it is still effective for them to have presentations instead of learning 4 to 5 skills in English? You're using the skills in the presentations. So you're, especially in a higher level in a high school, they're reading about their topic. You could have them do a writing about the topic, and then they're doing a presentation. And they're also writing in their presentation. And so they're doing a lot of skills in the presentation, and these are useful communicative skills. So I don't want you to see presentations as separate from language learning, because it is a part of language learning. They are learning skills in the presentations. My students in elementary school don't have enough vocabulary to make presentations, so I give them words to adapt the content or let them use dictionaries. This makes me think that the topic is too hard that they're doing in the presentation. If, and I know elementary, they don't have a lot of vocabulary, so maybe don't do presentations until the second half of the year. So maybe for the first half of the year, you're focusing on building vocabulary, and you have a vocabulary wall, and you show all the words that they're learning, and they become comfortable with that. Then later at the end of, the second half in the spring, or the second half of the year, they could start doing presentations. So that would be my suggestion, is to build some vocabulary first for elementary school, because they do have, a lack. And then once they have a good handle, a good hold on vocabulary, then you could start doing presentations. Oh, I mean, when I don't remember the previous comment, Masaki. I mean, when the proficiency levels in one class. If you could add a little bit more, I've forgotten what your first part was. I can go back and look. Let's see here. Okay, so your first comment was, what kind of activities do you recommend to increase the understanding when their vocabulary levels? So activities and not presentations, I'm guessing. So this could be a different topic than presentations. Am I right in that? So what I would suggest in general for differentiation is you have your lesson, and then you have activities that are different for different groups. You would use group work, or you would utilize stations, and they have different activities. So some are more basic. So if you think about Bloom's taxonomy, I talked about in the webinar before, you start with very simple tasks where they, just have to answer questions. And then other students who have a higher proficiency level, they can do more interaction, they can do more reflection, they can do more engagement with an activity. I'm not sure if you mean in presentations, but that is my suggestion, to have a group lesson and then have different activities of different levels. Okay, we are right at time to end, and I got through all the questions, but I think that's the first time that has happened. So thank you for your questions. Those were really good questions. We are ending. There is a survey that we would really appreciate you filling out. It's very short, but it really helps us to know how to plan the things that we do in the future here at the embassy. So thank you very much for doing that, and thank you for being here. And I hope you have a good evening, what's left of it, and I will see you at another time. Thank you.